Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight, the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Well, another report tonight from the American higher education arena in the Trump era. Tony Makula is a longtime math professor from the State University of New York at Geneseo. Shortly after the election, Professor Makula sent a mass email to about 600 of his colleagues, but addressed to unnamed Trump supporters. It began this way, quote, "So you voted for a candidate who embodies the white power movement and was enthusiastically endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, and other white supremacy groups. I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask you the following questions. 1, do you believe in white power and the supremacy of the white race? 2, do you believe that a multi-ethnic and multicultural democracy can succeed? Yes or no? I will respond accordingly." Well, joining me now to expand on what he meant by all that is Professor Tony Makula. Professor, thanks a lot for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. The letter didn't start like that. The letter ended like that.
Okay. Well, that was in the letter. Then my apologies, but that to me that was the sort of meat of it. And let me ask you this: I watched the campaign pretty closely.
Actually, the meat of it was the concept of civic responsibility.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you about that in just a minute. Let me get to your allegation that Trump embodies white supremacy and white power. I watched the campaign pretty closely. I never heard Trump say anything about white power or even allude to white power. I'm not sure I know what white power is. What did you mean when you wrote that?
Well, let me give you again the beginning of the letter, and then I could expound on that after that. So the reason why I wrote the letter is that silence in the face of civic irresponsibility is civically irresponsible, and I think. Casting a vote for a candidate who doesn't embody the ideals of the preamble of the Constitution, nor exhibits the values required of honesty, tolerance, equal protection, and respect, those values that are required to sustain those ideals, in my opinion, casting such a vote is civically irresponsible.
So you believe it's irresponsible to cast a vote for someone you disagree with, is what you're saying. Why can't it just be wrong? Why can't you just disagree? Why does it have to be irresponsible for someone to disagree with you?
It's irresponsible because we are charged to support the values of our Constitution. And one of the values, or one of the main points in the preamble is domestic tranquility. And that's the point where we get to white power.
Okay.
So, I mean, Donald Trump has retweeted white supremacist over 75 times. He's had opportunities to come right out and refute the support he's been given. He was just in North Carolina, and 2 days before he was in North Carolina, the KKK had a parade in his honor, and he said nothing about it. He hasn't taken opportunities.
Okay, I get it. So you're saying that bad people support him, and he hasn't disavowed them. That we used to call that McCarthyism, the idea that people were responsible for the endorsement of others or the physical proximity to others. I mean, if Kim Jong-un came out and endorsed you, you wouldn't be responsible for his regime, would you? If some campus shooter took your class, you wouldn't be responsible for the murders. That's an unfair standard, isn't it? Shouldn't we judge people by what they say? I mean, he had a year talking in public. Did he say anything to endorse white power, or didn't he?
Yes, he did endorse white power. I mean, he's essentially by deporting, by his building the wall. This is what really emboldened the white power movement, and realized that Donald Trump was their embodiment. They got excited when he decided to label all Mexicans as rapists and said he was going to build a wall. That's when they really felt like they had a champion.
You're a math professor, so presumably you deal in logic and linear thought, one leading to the next. You're saying that building a wall is prima facie evidence of white supremacy? Is that what you're saying? I just want to make sure I understand you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it's just one thing.
So I'm asking you, look, you say that he embodies the values of white power. You're holding him responsible for the views of people he has disavowed and hasn't supported. And I'm asking you, can you name anything he has said that endorses the concept of white power? And you can't, can you?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Okay.
He retweeted a quote by retweeted a tweet by a guy by the name of White Genocide TM, and this tweet irresponsibly said that white murders were 81% of white murders were committed by African Americans. It's a complete falsehood, and Trump retweeted it. The correct percentage
so getting a crime stat
is 14%.
Or retweeting some creepy guy. And by the way, I don't think he should be tweeting in the first place. I'm not defending the guy's tweeting. I'm just saying retweeting a crime stat that's wrong is evidence of white supremacy. I mean, that's not a real argument, Professor.
I didn't call Trump a white supremacist. I said that he embodies their movement.
Okay.
That's what I said, and he does. And they actually claim him as their leader.
Right. Okay. I get it. So I just want to know, and this is a subject of fascination for me. You live in the university world. Presumably, you have tenure. You've been there over 20 years. You get a guaranteed income, and you live in this little world. What would happen if
Hold on a second. One second.
Let me finish my question. What would happen if one of your colleagues sent out a mass email calling Black Lives Matter racist? They've actually excluded non-whites from their meetings. Trump has never excluded people who aren't white from his. They've excluded non-blacks, rather. And if someone said they're racist, do you think the university would really kind of stand back and say that's free speech? Or would there be consequences from the employer? There would be, wouldn't there?
I never called anyone a racist. I didn't make any assertions. No, I didn't make. Don't you know the difference between an assertion and a question?
No, I know what a weaselly inference is, and if you say the guy's responsible for the ugly views of people who support him, even though he's never articulated that views, you're inferring that he believes them. You say he's, quote, the embodiment of white power. You're calling him a bigot. Don't pretend, just say it out loud. Be a man about it. You saying he's a bigot, that's fine. I'm asking you to back it up.
I am, and I did back it up, okay? And I did back it up.
He retweeted some phony crime statistic? I mean, that's white power 2016? Are you serious? I mean, look, you don't have to like Trump. I'm not saying you should.
He's done many other things other than just retweet things.
Okay, well, I just gave you 7 minutes and you haven't told me what they are. So unfortunately, we're out of time. I wanted you to come forward and put some data behind this accusation that I'm hearing every single day, but you couldn't. So maybe I'll get another professor who's done his homework. Thanks a lot, Professor. Good to see you. Trump transition team, meanwhile, just made a big announcement about the president-elect's business interests. Fox News senior national correspondent John Roberts is live outside Trump Tower with the very latest on that. John, how you doing?
Hey, good evening to you, Tucker. I'm doing well, thanks. We had heard weeks ago that Donald Trump was going to hold a press conference on Thursday the 15th, at which he was going to detail how he was going to separate himself from his vast business enterprise, his vast array of businesses that he is tied with. But now we understand that he is going to delay that from this Thursday until sometime at the beginning of January, possibly the first week of January. The reason why, according to a transition official, that they have just got too much on their plate right now in terms of filling out the cabinet. Donald Trump is doing interviews from 10 o'clock in the morning until 7, 8 o'clock at night, and there just wasn't time to wedge all of that in. They said, no worry, there's no problem in delaying it, we will get it done. However, a top 2016 Democratic campaign operative says that Donald Trump could be playing shrewd with this, saying that he doesn't have to disclose any possible conflicts of interest until after the electors vote, and that vote happens on December the 19th, and there is already a move afoot by Democrats to try to get some of those electors to not vote for Donald Trump on the 19th in the states where they should be voting for Donald Trump. Another potential conflict coming up, and that could be with Donald Trump's Secretary of State nominee. Hasn't announced it yet, but sources are telling us it's Rex Tillerson, who is the president and CEO of ExxonMobil. The reason why there could be some problems in Congress, some headwinds at least, if not real problems, is that Rex Tillerson, in crafting many of his deals worldwide for the oil and gas giant, has got deep ties to Russia. In fact, he was given an award back in 2013 by Vladimir Putin. And some people who would go through the confirmation process, like Senator John McCain of Arizona, are wondering just how deep those ties to Russia go. Donald Trump expected to make that announcement sometime before the end of this week. Again, Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State. Trump likes the fact that he has crafted deals all over the world, some of them very complicated, and some places that are very difficult to do business in. A few of the other people that were wheeling through Trump Tower today as he tries to fill out the last 5 positions in his cabinet, the former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who you remember not too long ago called Donald Trump a, quote, cancer on conservatism, was at Trump Tower just a little while ago. A couple of jobs that he might be in line for: Secretary of Energy or Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Kathy McMorris Rogers, the highest ranking woman in Congress, was here earlier today. One of the big jobs that she could be up for would be Interior Secretary. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin was in earlier today. He could be in line for the energy job. Of course, West Virginia, big coal-producing state, and Manchin being a Democrat who shows somewhat independent, almost Republican-like tendencies, the Trump campaign, Trump transition team feels could be a welcome addition to his cabinet to show some level of bipartisanship. But Carly Fiorina was here earlier today, and this was the real interesting one. She was greeted by Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway. The two of them showed body language that was like they were long-lost friends or sisters who hadn't seen each other for a while. And you'll remember Donald Trump during the campaign said about Carly Fiorina, could you imagine that face being the face of our next president? Carly Fiorina responded by saying that he is a serial philanderer. He doesn't represent me or my party, and she would be horrified at the concept of Donald Trump becoming president. But all it took was one ride up and down the golden elevator and a short meeting with Donald Trump for her to completely change her tune about all of that. Here's what Fiorina told the Pool when she emerged from her meeting. Listen.
We had a really productive meeting. It was such an honor to meet with the president-elect.
Honored to meet with the president. She also said, Tucker, that he's got some really cool stuff in his office, including a big shoe that was given to him by Shaquille O'Neal, saying it takes a champion to know a champion. Goodness, how things change after a simple win in a presidential election. Tucker?
Thanks a lot, John. I appreciate it. Well, the White House today joined in the chorus of elected officials who are charging that the Trump campaign somehow benefited from influence by the Russian government during the campaign.
The Russians are not our friends. They invaded Crimea. Senator McCain and I and some of our Democratic friends met with a delegation from the Baltic countries just this past week to say that they're nervous about the Russians, to put it mildly.
Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bully, and a murderer. And anybody else who describes him as anything else is lying.
This is a form of warfare. For him to be trying to impact our elections, he has to be held accountable.
Is this something of a national emergency?
It does feel like we're on the verge of something potentially awful.
This simply cannot be a partisan issue.
Wow, and if you thought that was intense, at least 2 House Democrats have now called on the Electoral College to overturn the election results because of interference from Vladimir Putin. Our next guest has not gone that far, but he does have concerns about Russian hacking around the election. Joining us now is Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on. So there's a lot of noise around this, and there's probably something at the core of it. Wouldn't shock me. They've hacked a lot of things around Washington, the Russians. But what is the core allegation about the election? How are the Russians supposed to have influenced the election results specifically, for those of us following at home?
Well, so here's the concern. We want to find out if they did hack. And if they did hack, there needs to be repercussions against them. What I find is interesting in the montage leading up to this is all these folks on the left that are now somehow aghast by, and talking about how terrible Russia is and how Russia's not our friend are the same people that had this Russian reset under President Obama, that gave Syria to Russia, that gave Eastern Europe and Ukraine and Georgia to Russia. You look at this and say, wow, we hit an alternate universe. So I think we need to know if there was hacking. I think there needs to be big, I guess, punishments against the Russians if in fact they did. But that doesn't undermine the legitimacy of the fact that Donald Trump was elected president by a big majority of people.
Well, it depends. He didn't win the majority, as you know, of voters. He won the majority of electoral votes, and it would undermine the legitimacy of it. But I guess my question is, hack what? I mean, what is the core allegation? So as far as I understand, having followed the campaign pretty closely, the main revelation that came from hacking were John Podesta's emails. And they were gotten through a simple phishing scheme that you and I could have done. And I don't even think the intel community says the Russians did that necessarily. So what's the hacking we're talking about specifically?
So the allegation is they hacked the DNC, they got the information, and then there was ways of which the intelligence community claims to have known, which nobody can go into, about how they released that to WikiLeaks, where WikiLeaks then metered it out, as we saw in the last 2 or 3 months, as an attempt to embarrass the DNC, as an attempt to embarrass Hillary Clinton, and to influence. Now, maybe they did.
But just to correct you, I think that information was from John Podesta's Gmail account. The daily leaks that were in the papers, or some of them every day through WikiLeaks?
Of course.
Okay,
of course. I mean, but people have a reasonable expectation of privacy at the same time.
Well, I would support that completely, and I don't want anyone to hack into my email. But the allegation is not that John Podesta's email was hacked by the Russians. It was the DNC. And I don't remember information from that hack, whoever did it, influencing the election in any way. Maybe I missed it. Like, so how exactly did the Russians supposedly, or anybody, influence this election? I'm totally confused.
Well, yeah, see, look, and here's the point I'm trying to make, is I'm saying if, in fact, they attempted to, that's information that we need, because guess what? You know, it may have affected or benefited or whatever. This is going to come back against the Republican Party in 2 years when it benefits Russia to do it or whatever. We can have nobody try to influence our election that way. Now, I don't think it undermines the legitimacy of Donald Trump. I think he was elected by a huge amount of electoral votes. We're going to see that come to fruition on Monday. But we do have to get to the bottom of if, in fact, the Russians attempted to do it. And if the intelligence community says they do, and we spend billions of dollars for them to come to these conclusions about national defense, we got to get to the bottom of this.
The same intelligence community that didn't know Russia was about to invade Crimea, the same one that missed the fall of the Soviet Union, that one. Okay, but let me just ask you this really quickly. The Russians, we think at this point, hacked the White House computer system in October of, I think it was 14, and put the whole system down for weeks at the White House. That's a big deal. I don't remember that being covered very closely in the press. Like, nobody seemed to care. Where was the outrage when that happened? I mean, that's a real thing. Hacking the White House computer system, we can agree, is bad. Why did nobody say anything then?
Look, I think we can all agree with all this. Anytime they hack anything on the institution of the United States, whether electoral or whether government, there needs to be problems. And this is something we have not taken seriously for a very long time. There's broader issues about why they didn't see them coming into Crimea, but that's something that can't be discussed here.
I'm happy to discuss it. It's pretty lame if that's your job and you miss like everything, but whatever, sorry.
It also kind of has to do with there's reasons out there that you can't reveal on television. But, you know, at the end of the day, we all should be on the side of saying we have to protect our systems here, and we got to get down to that.
All right. Congressman, thanks all for joining us. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. See ya.
Time now for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. Tonight, Outlook is tainted by a fog of denial. Follow the metaphor, please. Coming from the pages of the New York Times opinion section, of course, at the epicenter of this hurricane of silliness, Paul Krugman. He's bemoaning the presidential election result as, quote, illegitimate in a new piece that's careening around the internet called The Tainted Election. So the headline that began trending on Twitter, and as always, there was some disagreement. Russell Brown wrote this: if exposing the hard truth means we have the tainted election, I want every election to be tainted. Austin Lake Mule wrote this: I thought the tainted election was referring to when the DNC rigged the primaries against Bernie. Who am I kidding? That would never happen. Ho, ho, ho. And the link wrote this: I see Clinton voters still in denial about the Rust Belt having spoken loudly and clearly on November 8th. And finally, this: my God, you crybabies, you lost. Stop trying to find excuses for your failures. Self-responsibility is wonderful, oh, but rare. And that's tonight's Twitter Storm. Next up, the electors who will officially vote for president 1 week from today are being threatened. Some of them are, but the DOJ doesn't seem too concerned about it. Why is that? We'll tell you. Also, ignoramuses, billionaires, and a few generals. That's how one purportedly conservative Washington Post columnist is describing the Trump cabinet so far. Laura Ingraham will assess that assessment later in the hour. Stay tuned. Well, right now, an update on a story that a viewer sent to us during our You Choose the News segment. And as we promised to do, we did look into it. Now, a week from now, 538 electors will cast their votes in the final and definitive and constitutionally mandated election of the year. And some of those electors, as well as some ordinary Trump voters, have been threatened with violence, and a few of the voters anyway have been subject to it. And yet somehow the Department of Justice doesn't seem all that interested in investigating any of this, or even in commenting why it won't investigate. One elector, Michael Benarian, joined us last week and told us about his experience.
I've just been inundated, not just myself, but electors across the country with hundreds of emails, Facebook messages, letters to my home. I'm getting like 5 or 6 a day, got a large stack on my dining room table, and they're just generally very hateful, angry messages. And unfortunately, I've received a couple of death threats, some death wishes, and just some angry messages from people who are disappointed in the election results.
Well, kind of a big deal. Where's DOJ in all of this? Well, here now in the studio, J. Christian Adams. He is a former attorney for the Department of Justice. Christian, it's great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
So you'd think under any other circumstance you can imagine, DOJ would be on this. I mean, they're on any kind of voter intimidation story, always, it seems like, but not these.
The inaction by justice really promotes a culture of lawlessness, of tolerance, of political violence. Just imagine, Tucker, it was 25 years ago, and Clinton just won, and his electors are being threatened with death. Or imagine if somebody who voted for Obama and got him elected in Georgia or Western Pennsylvania was caught on video being brutally beaten up.
It's a total Zanu PF move. No, it's Mugabe. You're right. I mean, look, the idea that we're not going to protect you unless you vote for us is scary. Now, there's no better example of this than a video of a guy called David Wilcox. I'm sure a lot of our viewers have seen this. It's a horrifying video, and it was November 8th, right after the election. He got into some kind of altercation in Chicago, got out of his car, and here's what happened. Watch this.
You vote Trump. You voted Trump. You voted Trump. Oh, yeah. Yeah, he voted Trump. She missed every time. Oh, yeah. Oh, I gotta do that to her. Oh, yeah. Damn. Don't vote Trump. Don't vote Trump. Don't vote Trump.
Now, I'm not for hate crimes laws because I think all of us are equal before the law. But if you're going to ever invoke one, I mean, here's a case where they're saying we're beating you up because of your race and who you voted for. Could it be clearer?
Violation of Section 11 of the Voting Rights Act, which says you can't intimidate, threaten, or coerce somebody for voting. It's clear violation. I've sent letters to the Justice Department saying, why aren't you doing anything about this? The Justice Department, when it comes to elections, protects their friends and ignores their enemies. That's why this guy is not getting justice in Chicago.
So there's no federal investigation into the tape we just showed that you're aware of?
As far as we know, we've got no response. Public Interest Legal Foundation sent a letter to the voting section and the criminal section in the Civil Rights Division. The same people who rush to any other event, but we've got no response.
Who argue that, your opinions are making me feel, quote, unsafe. Okay. Here you have a guy who's getting kicked in the face on the ground for voting Trump, and because he's the wrong skin color, and they're not doing anything? I mean, it's hard to believe that.
And they're specifically yelling, he voted Trump. Imagine if it was right outside Pittsburgh in 2008, Obama wins the election, and people are dragging people out of cars who are African Americans saying he voted for Obama. Everybody watching knows what the Justice Department would do and should do.
And by the way, I'd be completely for it. I mean, I'd be for them coming. You can't hit people or commit any act of violence because you disagree with their politics.
Exactly, and that's what we're risking here. With electors being threatened by people, if you vote for Trump, we'll kill you. With voters being threatened, you voted for Trump, let's beat him up. That's a dangerous, incendiary situation that needs to be fixed.
Well, I would love to have someone with the Justice Department on, and I doubt they'd come to explain why they're not doing anything about that. Chris Adams, thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Tucker.
Great to
see you.
You too.
Well, a college professor caught on tape, on camera actually, going on an unhinged rant about Trump. She's not in trouble, though. Guess who is? The student who filmed it, of course. We'll talk to him next. Well, another story now that a viewer sent to us as part of the You Choose the News section of the show. Here's the story. A student at Orange Coast College in California recorded psychology professor Olga Perez-Stable-Cox, she teaches a class on human sexuality, calling Trump's election an act of terrorism during a lecture. But after the school's college Republican group uploaded that video to Facebook this week, the local teachers union threatened the students who recorded it, who remain anonymous, by the way. The group is refusing to reveal who did it, and for probably good reason. Here now is Josh Recalde-Martinez, who's the president of the Orange Coast College Republicans, and Sean Steele, the attorney representing that group. It's great to see you both. So, Josh, first to you. Here's the account of a kid who was in the class. His name is Tanner Webb. Quote of the teacher: she tried to get everyone who voted for Trump to stand up and show the rest of the class who to watch out for. It seems really ominous to me. Was it surprising, given that in her quotes, that the union is threatening you?
It is, and that's one of the reasons why now, upon the realization of this, that we will be pressing for her to be fired from the school for those actions taken in that class.
I mean, I don't want to be catty or anything, but I listened to the whole tape and I read a bunch of quotes from her. I mean, she didn't seem very professional or even capable of grammatical English, really. I mean, is this common in her class? Do you know? Have you talked to students who've taken it before?
Well, one of the reasons why Rate My Professor has her as a 1.7 when it comes to difficulty is because it's such an easy class. And I think it's pretty obvious why that is. And on top of that, the union considers itself a union of professionals. That's their slogan. Well, I can tell you by defending this professor, they're clearly showing that they're a union of unprofessionals to me.
Well, and also a union of thugs. So, Sean Steele, this is one of the quotes from that union. The student who is sitting in assigned seating will be identified and could face legal action. So apparently the union is threatening to ferret out his identity and punish him. Did they mention anything about the behavior of the teacher?
Well, of course not. They're defending the teacher who talks about trumping white supremacists, that voting for Trump is an act of terror. But here's the worst part of all is, and you mentioned it earlier, she actually, after the video, she asked students to stand if they had supported Trump, and so other students could see who these people were. And then she said, oh, I see nobody standing, so I guess you're too cowardly to admit it. Now, this is a line crosser. This is information we didn't have. We knew they were going after the student who took the video. That's why I came in as a pro bono attorney. We knew that the college Republicans were under attack. We knew that the administration was not going to be helpful, but we did not know until two other students came out and said no. She went further. She wanted to identify, humiliate, and shame the students. That crosses a line. This teacher is unfit to be in a classroom.
Well, it's such an abuse of power. I mean, she's the authority figure there, and she's threatening people who disagree with her political views. Yes.
She's a bully. She controls the grades. It's a captive audience.
That's right.
And she has no respect for the students.
Well, and so, Josh, this all came out. We're talking about it now because someone had the presence of mind to film it. So every college student has an iPhone in pocket or some kind of phone with a video camera on it. I mean, what a transformative thing it would be if more of these videos came out. Are you encouraging your members to videotape their professors?
Well, one of the things that we did was not, preemptively encourage members to videotape their professors. I know that people on the opposition side is saying that we did to get an I gotcha moment, and that's simply not true. In addition to that, I just want to inform you all that we've recently received word from the school in a joint statement made by the union, the college president, and the academic senate president that they will be standing by the teacher and that they will continue the assault on the student. Stuff like this to me is really astonishing at the school, which I love so greatly, and serve as a member of their student government. It's astonishing.
They don't care about you. I want to raise... But wait, let me ask you a question, Sean, as a lawyer. Why shouldn't every student who feels he's subjected to propaganda and threats, as in this case from a teacher, film it? I mean, what's the counter argument against that?
There is none. It's an absolute First Amendment freedom. There's no expectation of privacy. There's no expectation of privacy among 300 students. Students are recording their professors all over the country. We're asking that every conservative college student, as soon as they get in as a freshman, make sure that their phone is always charged before they get into the classroom. And when things get crazy, absolutely record it, because that's the only way to keep these professors honest. The intellectual diversity doesn't exist on college campuses. It's one-sided, and it's mean-spirited.
Well, I totally agree, and God bless you for saying that. Josh, Sean, thank you. And by the way, if you're watching this show and you have kids in college, send videos here. Tucker Carlson tonight at foxnews.com. We will put them up, and whatever you do, be sure to get it on tape. We appreciate it. Well, in the news you can't make up section of tonight's show, the New York Times has hired a new reporter, a man who once described himself sarcastically but very accurately as a hack. This is a man who sought the Clinton campaign's approval a couple of times for his stories before he printed them. His name is Glenn Thrush, and he works at Politico, and he was exposed when WikiLeaks released emails from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta's Gmail account. In one of those emails, Thrush told Podesta, and we're quoting now, "Because I have become a hack, I will send you the whole section that pertains to you. Please don't share or tell anyone I did this. Tell me if I effed anything up." Well, the New York Times, in its release, described Thrush, renowned in the press corps as a Democratic Party sycophant, as, quote, a premier journalist and a stellar addition to our White House team. Across Washington, people who know him started laughing. Thrush, of course, will be covering Trump, whom he hates. If you don't believe that, check out his Twitter account, where it's all on full and florid display. That's your objective journalism. Well, Christians are under attack in Egypt, a horrific bombing, killing women and children at a church in Cairo just yesterday. and it's only the most recent attack on Christians overseas. Does anyone care? We'll talk to the head bishop of the Coptic Church. Stay tuned. Fox News alert, Donald Trump is on Twitter breaking transition news at this hour. Just minutes ago, he tweeted this, quote, "I will be making my announcement on the next Secretary of State tomorrow morning." So it's official. We now know President-elect Trump's tomorrow. He's going to be doing that. And, of course, we'll be covering it right here at 7 Eastern tomorrow. Well, a manhunt is underway at this hour in Cairo, Egypt. Dozens of people, mostly women and children, murdered when a bomb tore through that city's main Coptic Christian church on Sunday during services. There have already been several arrests, but more suspects are still on the run. This is hardly the first time Christians in Egypt have been under attack. Joining me now is Bishop Angelos. He's the General Bishop of the Coptic Orthodox Church in the United Kingdom. Bishop, thanks a lot for joining us.
Good evening.
So this is a horrifying attack, obviously, but it's not isolated, as we just said. Do you think Christians who seem to be under attack from all sides in the Middle East have a future in that region?
There's definitely a future. I think it's very challenging. It's very difficult. There are obstacles and there are major problems. The Christians of Egypt represent now about 80% of the Christians in the whole Middle East, representing 15% of Egypt. And we've seen a very, very quick and rapid decrease in numbers across Libya, Iraq, Palestinian territories, even Syria.
Yes, and Lebanon. And yet there's been virtually silence, relatively speaking, from Christian leaders in other parts of the world. You would think, since there does seem to be a concerted effort to drive Christians out of these countries and attacks on them because of their faith, that you would hear more from the Archbishop of Canterbury, for example, or Pope Francis, but you don't, and I wonder why that is.
Well, actually, there's a slight correction. In the past, I would say you're right, but in the past couple of years, both Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's a personal friend, have responded. I was just speaking to contact the Archbishop yesterday. We're having a memorial service in London as soon as I get back on Wednesday for the people who have died in London, in Cairo. Yes. So there is a lot more interaction at the moment because there's a lot more visibility, I think.
Well, let me give you a specific example of what I'm talking about. So under American law, people who are being persecuted for, among other things, their religious faith have a claim on refugee status. And yet the Obama administration has admitted virtually no Christian refugees from Syria. I think out of the 10,000 we've admitted so far, roughly we've admitted 57 Christians, which is about half of 1%. Clearly they're discriminating against Christians. And yet you haven't seen leaders of Christian faiths in America or in Europe decry that and say, wait a second, why aren't we allowing Christian refugees in greater numbers? Why?
I think there's a major flaw in the system. We just had the Patriarch of the Syrian Orthodox Church in London last week, and I organized a meeting in the House of Lords for him. The problem is that these schemes bring in refugees that are registered under United Nations UNHCR system. Christians tend to be cared for by Christian communities, and they're not registered under that scheme. So we need to encourage governments to work with the UN to get the Christians registered, because, as you say, there's a double discrimination. They don't have the protection of the camps, and at the same time, they don't come under the schemes for refugee status. So I very much agree with you that this has to change.
Now, I don't want to single anybody out, and I think there's a lot that's admirable about Pope Francis, but in May, he went to Greece and was among refugees and brought, I think, about a dozen of them back with him to Rome. There was a Christian family there of refugees. He did not bring them back and didn't use that opportunity to decry what some call the genocide of Christians in the region. How helpful would it be if Pope Francis were to stand up and say, this really is a huge problem and we ought to tie it to our refugee policies and rescue some of these people from the dangers they face? Would that help?
Again, I think it would be very helpful. As Christians, and I think I stand in the same place, even though I'm an Egyptian, I'm a Coptic bishop, I think we need to respond to the refugee crisis blind to faith and equally. Of course, at least Christians should be proportionately represented. And I do think that under these schemes, whether it's church leaders, whether it's nation states, whether it's organizations, they need to bear in mind that Christians need to be represented at least proportionately so they can have an equal opportunity to leave the difficulty and the struggle that they're living through, because they are persecuted for their faith in many cases. When they go into camps, they are persecuted for their faith, and then they have no way out.
Do you think, my last question to you, but you've often heard the government of Syria, the Assad government of Syria, described as a protector of Christians through the years. Do you think that's accurate? Were they a protector of Christians?
I think when you look at the Middle East in a broad sense, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Libya, the existing governments gave a status quo and a balance. The removal of these governments created a vacuum. And so that in itself created a challenge. Now, Christians are resilient by nature. They're hopeful. They continue to live. They continue to be a reconciling force, and their presence is important. But before we scream for democracy and democratic change, we surely must have an alternative. Otherwise, we create a political vacuum, and then those most vulnerable, whether they're Christians or Yazidis or anybody else, end up bearing the brunt not only of the vacuum, but also of oppressive groups and regimes that come in.
That is such a wise point, one of the many unintended consequences. Bishop, thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you for all you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, at least one Republican in Washington is not happy with Donald Trump or his cabinet picks. Not just one, actually. There are many. But you might remember Jennifer Rubin from the show Friday. Laura Ingraham is here to respond to that, among other things, next. Time now for the Friend Zone, where we invite one of our friends within the building, including one who's sitting next to me laughing, onto the show.
Friend Zone. What's this, Fox and Friends? What is a Friend Zone?
This is Laura Ingraham.
What is this?
She works here. She's also a radio talk show host and editor of Life's Ed, and my neighbor here in Washington, who I see all the time, wandering around the hood.
Eating pizza the other day.
Exactly. So a lot of Republican establishment figures are very upset about Trump, and I would say none more so than the Republican blogger, writer, whatever, from the Washington Post, Jennifer Rubin. She's been going after Trump. She said this on MSNBC the other day, and I just kind of wanted to get your response to it. Watch.
I wish I could say that Ben Carson was the only person who didn't have experience in his area, but as you mentioned, Tillerson, we also have Terry Branstad, who is the ambassador to China. He's been the governor of Iowa. We have, and I like her, I think she's smart, Nikki Haley, terrific person, but she is going to the UN. Does she have any foreign policy experience? So I think what we have are ignoramuses, billionaires, and a few generals.
So you don't have to like all the Trump appointees. I don't. But there's a hostility there that you recognize from other Republicans in D.C. What's that about?
She's the same type of person, bless her heart, who will say that anyone who's for enforcing our border is anti-immigrant.
Right. Or
anyone who's for examining trade deals where the American worker gets hammered is anti-trade. This is the facile construction of the establishment that just got drubbed in this election. And so, let's see, Wilbur Ross, one of the most successful investors in the world. Right. Steel and coal, he finds dying industries and revives them. So he's not all that qualified, I guess, to run commerce. And, oh, wait, Steve Mnuchin, one of the top folks, of course, formerly at Goldman, then went into invest in films, incredibly smart. She obviously hasn't met him. She doesn't know him. You go on and on, obviously, General Kelly, General Mattis. These are some of the finest people we have in America, let alone qualified to do their jobs. You know, Branstad, I don't know what to say about that. I'm sure not every pick is a complete home run, but we certainly had a lot of so-called experts over the last two administrations, both the Bush administration that she is enamored of and the Obama administration that were the smartest people around as America got weaker and weaker and less powerful and more in debt. Right. So maybe it's time to give it a different try.
And who got weaker with Trump's election? People like Jennifer Rubin.
Well,
and
that
may be part of it.
Blogging for the Washington. I guess we can't be as qualified as blogging for the Washington Post.
So you are very tough and strong and assertive, but I saw you at lunch with your children, a couple of them, and I thought, there's another, Laura's actually one of the sweeter people in Washington, and I wanted to highlight something you're doing. Yeah, best kept secret. A charity that you're involved in. Tell us about it in Guatemala.
Food for the Poor, which is actually operates in 17 different countries. They are phenomenal. 95% of all the money they get a lot of small contributions, some bigger contributions as well, but goes right to services that help the poor, not just handing out food and water, but also self-sustainability. So people in areas where they really haven't gotten the benefit of a free market. They really haven't gotten the benefit, oftentimes, of a non-corrupt government. Actually helps these people help themselves. It's amazing. And why I know about it is because I went to one of their countries, Guatemala, which is near and dear to my heart because, of course, my daughter Maria, who's 11, is from Guatemala. And so I brought her, and I went with Food for the Poor. I'm like, I got to see what y'all do. And so we went, and I'm like, I spent time both crying, smiling, laughing, and just absorbing the angels that walk among us. People who do the kind of stuff that, frankly, you and I don't do, but we give money and support it. From nuns who are like these frail 70-year-old nuns to young people to people from the United States who go there and work. And I know a lot of people watching say, well, we have a lot of problems here. Of course we do. But sometimes the least among us actually aren't in our own backyard. Sometimes they're in other countries. And last time I checked, the Bible doesn't discriminate between people in your own country and people in other countries.
True. So we're going to put this on our Facebook page.
Foodforthepoor.com.
Foodforthepoor.com. And you endorse it.
Phenomenal group across the board. And the people who run it, it's very faith-based.
Yes.
But they work with people from all different types of NGOs. And, I mean, you meet people and they just emanate goodness.
Yes.
These are those people.
I love that because there's so many bad charities, and to hear of a good one.
No.
I love it.
Well, thank you.
Laura Ingraham, thank you.
Great to see you. All right, take care.
Coming up, it's almost time for news abuse. Keep sending the most egregious examples of bias or dumbness you've seen in the press. You can send it to Twitter at Tucker Carlson or email Tucker Carlson tonight at foxnews.com. We'll read the best coming up. Well, now it's time for news abuse. We asked you to send in the most egregious examples of media bias and dumbness you have seen. There's so many to choose from. It's unbelievable. Freedom628 tweet us this headline from Salon: Women's March on Washington barred from protesting Donald Trump inauguration. Turns out they didn't get their act together in time to get a permit, which is a little different from being barred, just so you know. Next up is a headline sent from Dave Seminar from the Washington Post. Russian interference could give courts legal authority to install Clinton. Wow, in the wish fulfillment category tonight. And then Twitter user Goom sent us this Washington Post headline, and it's pretty direct. Donald Trump is actually a fascist. Huh? If you think that's out there, tonight's Subtlety in Journalism Award goes to the New York Times, as always, with this headline: An alt-right makeover shrouds the swastikas. Whoa! Mean tweets tomorrow night. Send them to us. Bill O'Reilly next. Don't miss it.